I wanted to show you guys these paintings. Now, these paintings are actually both of me, and these were done, I mean, God, like 30 years ago. And so one on the right is Dan Gerhardt's, and one on the left is Rose Franston. And the reason why I'm showing these is because they're both slightly like 3/4, and their eyes are both looking down. And I thought that was very important because I noticed that in some of the homework, people were imagining things that weren't there. You know, they were showing me the whites of the eye, or they're showing me details or highlights, things that actually weren't in the reference. And so I wanted you guys to see that, you know, as you look at this painting, he painted only what he saw when he squinted. So when you see this whole shape, you see how he doesn't go in there and show us the whites of the eyes or any details. And the same thing, you know, with Rose. Rose's painting of me is a little bit softer light. It's definitely more of just like fluorescence. And, you know, Dan's was kind of fluorescence north light, but it's just a teensy bit stronger of a spotlight. So I just wanted you guys to see how simple they made the eyes. And also, you know, how the eye that's farthest away from us is just a little bit smaller and softer and less important. One thing that I really noticed in Dan's painting is this photograph, you know, might be a teensy bit too green, but it's the whole idea. It's really just a value study. You see how it's just like a warm and cool. He just used like a green and a brown and a pink. So it's really how everything, you see there's a distinct shadow pattern. And actually, I actually put this into black and white so you guys can see exactly. Sometimes it's hard to know. So here we go. So this is a black and white. So you see how the cheek line right here, some people in the homework, I kept saying, give me exactly where that cheek shadow is. Now, it doesn't have to be, you know, like a value 9, but there has to be a distinction between shadow and light. And so that's what I was hoping for, that you tell me that this is the light shape and that this is the shadow shape. Now, I know that getting these transitions right here are difficult. And what happens is we fudge, we soften, we repaint, we fudge, we soften, we repaint. And over time, it gets muddled. And sometimes we you know, don't even know where the line is. And, you know, so that's why I also, you know, talk about posterizing, because this is an extreme version. So like when you know, do posterizing, you do extreme, it can get this kind of, you know, contrasting. But you see, now I can see exactly where this shadow is and see exactly where this, you know, light is. And if over time I'm having a hard time deciphering that, I take a look at my posterize and it reminds me. It's like a little teaching tool. It reminds me where the shadow is. And so that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that you guys can start to really see the difference between what's in the shadow and what's in the light, and that it doesn't necessarily mean that the lights are value, you know, 1s and the shadows are value 10s, but it means that it's solid. So you look at this black and white, there's nothing in here. There's not a lot of nuance, there's no bounce color, there's no bounce value, there's not little strokes that are taking you away from this. That is what we're hoping to do, is solidifying what's in the shadow and what's in the light. And also look at what this great sharp line he has right here. So in some people I was asking, really find a few sharp edges in your painting to allow everything else to stay soft. Because if everything is really soft, then it almost looks like there's no weight or structure or form. You have to find things that are around bone. You know, you're never going to have a sharp edge like this in a place that's turning slowly, right? Anywhere down here. You're going to have this right here where bone is turning abrupt, or depending on the light. Sometimes if the light is from above, you might have a strong edge right here because it's like a 90-degree, you know, turning. But you're not going to have it in the eye. everything in here is just a little bit soft. Think about the eye as a ball. So it's turning up, it's turning side, it's turning below. You have eyelashes that are creating this, this, shadowy, foggy, ghost-like, look over the eyeball. Your lips are so soft and it's just tissue and muscle, so there's no bone down here. So primarily where I find, depending on the light, I find sharp edges somewhere around the nose, and so every now and then you can find it like near the chin or maybe in the forehead, like if you see the forehead and there's like an abrupt turn. But it's something to keep reminding yourself that, really great fine art has soft and hard. There's a balance, and that's the cool thing about Zorn. Oh my gosh, he has so many hard edges, and yet it works, and we love it. This painting is life size, okay? So what happens is people want detail, and I think Scott and I are artists. Now, Scott actually probably puts a little bit more detail than I do. I am striving to paint more like Sargent and less like a photorealistic artist every day of my life. So what I think about is I think, how can I do less? So that's what this painting is telling you. There's no details. Everything is all about the biggest shapes possible. There's a difference between the shadow and the light. You look underneath this nose, everything is solid. Doesn't necessarily mean that it is a value 10, but it means that when we squint, I want you guys to squint at this photo and you see a distinct edge, right? You can literally pencil around this shape. So that is the idea of keeping it solid and not looking in here and doing this little bounce right here and little bounce right there, and looking into the eye and giving me a little highlight and a little edge on the lower lid, and I guess over detailing. So I guess my preference is I would prefer my paintings to have a simplicity, and I guess our philosophy is the more you leave out and still say the same thing, artists know how hard it is to edit, how hard it is to say something with less. And, there was always this talk that, the artist, right? We all know who they are. And, when we talk and we're at a group, we all know who that artists are because they have the ability to leave out details that aren't necessary, and able to just put just the right amount of work into it and say everything, and we're all gaga. We're all like, oh my gosh, look what that artist did. How did they do that? How do they have that confidence? Pick one eye over the other. So you see how the eye on the right is the dominant eye and the eye on the left is the less important eye. We look at both eyes so much, and we're painting one eye for a half hour. Okay, the next half hour we paint this eye, and we forget to realize that there's a relationship with them. And so in painting, I'll say this a million times, but in life, when we're talking to someone, you cannot be looking at two eyes at the same time. Try it. Try going up to your husband or whoever the next person you're talking to. See if you can look at both of their eyes at the same time. You'll get cross-eyed. You'll start to look right here, because humanly possible, we can't do it. So in art, we are trying to duplicate that. And so this eye is the stronger eye, and then everything is like a bullseye. And so this eye is in the periphery, this nose in the periphery, this mouth, everything is peripheral vision. And as artists, we tell people where to look. We guide them. Like it's no by chance, where the focal point is, where the strongest edges are, where the strongest colors. We're telling them that. Highlights on eyes, highlights anywhere. If you see a highlight, it's because it is on something glossy or slippery, slick, smooth. And the reason why you see this highlight is because the eye is wet. You don't see this highlight right here. You don't see this highlight in the hair. you see it because the eyeball is round and wet. And that's why you see a highlight. So we see highlights on glass. We see highlights on anything like that is really, really shiny, but mainly like water and glass and, you know, like your eyes, jewelry, something that, and highlights have sharp edges. So those are the things that you study. So when you guys are painting flowers in a water vase or a copper pot or something that has a super strong highlight, you have to see and understand that really there are some sharp edges there. And where is the light coming from? Where is that sharp edge? How do you show that? And also, the only reason why it looks this bright is because I had to put a dark around it. Like, this would not look bright if I put it right here. It only looks this bright because I had to have a dark underneath it. And I want you to also see how this highlight on the left is so much subservient to this one. You see how it's less, it's smaller, it's, you know, even the value's darker. So those are just things for you to think about, that highlights are never guessed at. They actually have their own shape. And on noses, highlights in general, if you think about the nose has bone coming down, 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 down. And then all of a sudden, you guys, we've all seen it, right? That's where the nose bone ends, and then all of a sudden there's cartilage. In general, not everybody, but usually right the farthest part of the nose, or where the highlights are, is right on the edge of the bone, and the farthest part of the cartilage that comes out before it starts to turn down. And for the most part, highlights are in line with the top of the wing of the nose. So here's the wing of the nose. So if you go to the top of the wing of the nose and you go over, the highlight is going to be more in this level. It's never going to be down here, because that would mean that they have like a bird beak. And then all of a sudden, just right where the highlight, because you figure out where the highlight is, and then where the highlight is, all of a sudden it starts to turn under, starts to turn under, starts to turn under. So a highlight can never be too low on the nose. All right, so this is a painting that I did from life, from a model in Scottsdale. And as you guys know, I love profiles. And I want you to see how simple and thin I made the hair. So it's solid, but it's also kind of thin. And only in a few spots did I put a few kind of darker accents. But in general, it's all pretty thin. And I want you to see how I just chose a few strands of hair. And I think of it as sculpture. So, you know, if I was to do this in clay, I'd have to think of this whole light shape, and then this turning, and then like an accent, but it's never like individual hairs. And also, you can see that there's a very distinct edge of where the shadow is and where the light is. And so this is also where I told you guys how, you see how I make up these little highlight strokes and then I just put them down and leave them? That's what my goal is to, on top of this thinner paint, this more solid, light overall value, the highlights are thicker. And then I try my hardest to put them down in strokes and leave them. So that's just something to think about. And also the fact that, you know, this is kind of like my biggest light area. So you look at the cheek, or you look at the lips, or you look at the ear. You see how there's like a hierarchy. His nose had this super sharp edge right here, but in general, this is my biggest light. And even the lights on the nose are, you know, maybe a half a value darker. So that's the idea of thinking about a hierarchy, is that you have, you know, not all of your lights are going to be the same value. And so this one was just a really good one about simplifying hair, thinking of it as one big shape. And you see how the ear is secondary. The ear is in the shadow plane. So I can't have anything in here as light as up here. So I really want it to look like this is my center of interest, and this is secondary, secondary, secondary. And I love profiles, and I love being able to like shape hair and shape design in the background. Scott and I are sort of addicted to them. In fact, Scott said our model Rose is such a good profile that he has a hard time not choosing profiles all the time, and me too. I am drawn to profiles. So I have to force myself to not just keep painting them. Now, so here we go. Here's a profile. So this is also something that I want you guys to see. Now, the photograph that I painted from her showed so much more detail, right, of these flowers in her hair. And I had to simplify these. And gosh, it, like over and over and over again, I had to make these flowers darker and darker and darker, because if I opened my eyes, these flowers would become so detailed and they would compete with her. And I really wanted to have that back moonlight, this light that glowed on her face. And the flowers were secondary. They were just design elements. So that was something that, as like I tell people that, you get the drawing and you get the big value patterns. Then it's like a lot of decisions. How do you make it fine art? So I had to keep, deciding that this violet up here in the right-hand corner was not as bright or as strong or as detailed as anything in her face. So I had to keep, maybe darkening or softening or taking out, or, I had to keep simplifying the back of her head so that nothing here was as sharp as or as detailed as up here. And something that I also had to do was, at the very end of my painting, I had to put these really strong little lights right here. I noticed that at the very end, I just didn't think I pushed them enough. And that's also why I want you guys to see there's a distinct difference between the shadow and the light. Really, there's a very strong, you could cut this out. Cut out with scissors. See how really these halftones are very little and only the pretty color is right here on the edge? So that's what, I build up at the end of my painting. I'm not putting these strokes in the beginning. I'm getting the drawing. I'm getting this value simplified. I'm getting the relationship between trying to get the light, the background, the hair, all of this stuff I have to decide. And I also just want you guys to see how I simplified the eye. You see how I didn't go in here and give you like the wide of the eye or a sharp lid underneath. I really tried to paint what I saw when I squinted, and this dark went right into the side of the face. And so when I first blocked it in, I blocked everything in with this value. Then I put this dark shape on top of this. I put this little dark shape of the nostril on top of this. I put this tiny little kind of medium dark shape of the lips on top of this. So I blocked in the face with this value, and then I added these little bits of these darker versions on top. And I only, painted what I saw when I squinted. So that's just something, and all these squiggly lines and all this stuff I did at the end. Those are just the fine art things you do at the end. Sometimes I don't even know, exactly what's going to happen at the end. I know that I want this strong light. Okay, so this is the painting that Scott, we were talking about. So I've been asking you to think about doing smaller versions and planning out and getting what you want relatively correct before you do something big. So this is a 9x12. So this was a pose that Scott and I, did of a young girl. And, I love the pose so much, but I was a little intimidated to I've always been a little intimidated to do something life-size. So I thought, I'm going to do it a 9x12 and kind of figure out what I want to do. And so that's just something that I did. So you see how it's a little bit easier to get. You see how I added these strokes at the very end, these like blues and pinks, all along here. So I get the values, and then I add these little halftones. But you have to be careful. It can't be too vibrant, and they have to stay close to this light pattern. And you see how I simplified in here. Don't look into things too much. Anyways, so I did that one first, and then I did this one second. So it's a little different, right? This one is definitely more purple and blue, and this one is more of a kind of a brown, kind of a dark. But you see how there's just a little bit more detail. And so this might answer the question to the person who asked, painting bigger from a smaller. So it's still very similar, right? It's still very, very similar. The value's the same, the drawing's the same. there's just maybe the tiniest bit more detail. You know, maybe a little bit, tiniest bit more detail in the jewelry. Maybe the teensiest bit more in the fingers. And I had just a littlest bit more of this design in the background. But in general, it's very, very similar idea. This is a painting, this actually came out too red, I think. But this is a painting of Scott. So you see the simple eye shape, blocking all of this, nothing in here. The white of the eye is not white. You know, the eyelashes are not black. Everything in here, you know, and then underneath here, it's all just, the values aren't super dark, but they're solid. Now, my painting was probably an 8 by 10. So it was very little. Or it could have been a 9 by 12, but I mean, the head was small. And, you know, so I want you just to see the whole eye socket, how these values are close together so I don't paint an edge. These values are close together so I don't outline it. So that's just to show you how differently we paint. And you see how, you know, I don't go in there and give detail because when I squinted, I didn't see any detail. Oh, so here's another little head from life. I actually painted this on Arches oil paper. So if you guys want something that's interesting to paint on and is inexpensive, but it has a certain feel to it. Like, I love it, but it does have a certain, like, it's like it reacts a little bit. And once you get that first initial wash, then I absolutely love it. But yeah, so this is a little head from life, Arches oil paper. See how clean this is? I don't put information, especially when I'm doing a little painting from life. I really just want to get the larger shapes. So shadow, light, you know, shadow, light, shadow. You know, it's really just like a warm brown and then a cool brown and some just little transitions of cools on top. It's a lot of squinting. This was under daylight, you know, so I did this from a photo from one of our trips. And I really just wanted to simplify these eye shapes. Nothing in here. So if I squinted and I didn't see anything, I didn't paint anything. This is from the same painting. So this character was just a little bit darker skinned and the shadows were just a little bit stronger. But I want you to see that once you can train yourself to paint only what you see when you squint, it looks so much more realistic. So people would have a tendency to go in here and put highlights or whites or details or make the lips as dark as the eyes. But when I squinted, I really had to judge. There's so many decisions you have to do. You know, this hierarchy, dark, middle, light. And you see, like, this is my highlight right here. So nothing else in the face could compete with this. So these are all the things, you know, that happen past 50%. First, I have to get the drawing. And then I have to get, you know, these shadow patterns. So I scumble those in. Then it's all about, okay, how do I keep these simple? How do I keep these simple? Where is the strongest? Where's my sharpest edge in the darks? Oh, okay, you know, what is these values? Are these close together so the edge is softer? It's a zillion decisions. So how do I make it simple for myself? Well, I go step by step and I go slowly and I try and just constantly keeping my shadows and my lights separate. All right. Okay, so this is the actual painting. It's not the greatest, it's a little bit low resolution, but. So, you know, I pick out my color harmonies first. I think about, like, you know, definitely this foreground girl is the strongest, then second, then third. You know, so you think about, okay, where do you want the viewer to look? So I have the strongest contrast because there's light, dark, light. And, you know, zig, zag, zing, you know, where do you want people to look? So I knew that the hands down here. Nothing down here could be as bright or contrasty or as colorful as right there. So that are the fine art decisions. You know, what edges do I want to like disappear? What is the information that I want to leave out? I mean, this headband and this jewelry had so much more information, so many more beads, so much more detail that I could have put in, but I knew I didn't want that. I wanted it just to be graphic shapes.
Reflect light into some of the shadow shape. A lot of times it's just blocking light out that will create interesting designs. But I'm always just moving the models around. When we have a model that we're painting, we're moving myself around if it's just a scene and trying to find interesting lighting. So that's there's no one rule for that. It's just a lot of experimenting. You have to always, even when I'm not photographing people, I'm always looking at, wow, look at that lighting, look at this, and I'm thinking about it. What's creating this effect? And then that might be something that I remember and that I set up later. I've had many times where I see some effect and I think, that is just spectacular. And so I will try and recreate that. I'll think, oh, that's happening because of this particular way something light is bouncing into somebody's face. So it's a lot of it is experimenting. Now, I love the outdoor lighting. Like I took pictures of Rose in the studio. This is one that I took in the studio, and we were using the north light that was coming in. I set up a dark cloth behind her. Let me zoom out a little bit, and you can see on the photograph here. You can just see a little bit of where the gap. I put a screen up, and then I put this black cloth. It just ends right about there. And so Sue's north windows are all around her 12 sides. So what I did is I turned off all of the lights in the studio except for two fluorescent lights further away. So it filled in a little bit of this. But this glow here is all just from her north window. So the north window is maybe like this big behind her. And then I have this black cloth behind her. I had her move forward a little bit until I got this glow light shooting around her.